I'm transforming tire valve stem caps into tiny cakes without using any clay. Since these caps go on the outside of your tire, they tend to get a little dirty, so I'm giving them a quick clean. Starting with a clean surface will help anything I add to them, like paint and glue, stick. I'm using these foam thimbles I got at the Dollar Tree to protect my fingertips while I flatten the top. I removed the bump from 2 of them and I'm keeping it on 1. I'm filling the caps with hot glue and sticking them to various surfaces to hold them while I decorate them. The hot glue stuck really well to the wooden sticks, but not so much to the smooth metal tweezers. First up, I'm using some round, no-hole beads to look like a piped border. I'm adding a lot of glue, but it will eventually be covered up. I spent about 2 seconds adding the beads one at a time using tweezers before resorting to a less tedious method. It's a lot easier to drop a bunch of beads into the wet glue all at once. The glue is nice and slippery, which makes it easy to slide the beads into place. If you'd like, you can add a border just to the top, but I like the look of the border on the bottom as well. I added excess glue, dropped the beads, and pushed them into place. To prevent the beads sticking, I stuck my blade underneath to make a tiny bit of space. At this point, the beads could easily pop off, but later steps will help secure them. For the second cake, we're simulating another piped frosting border using this little rope trim. I believe this came from a price tag, so make sure you scrutinize things before you throw them away. I glued a piece around the bottom and cut off the excess. Adding it to the top could try your patience, so I came up with a very simple method. I'm soaking the little piece of trim in some glue so it'll hold its shape. The diameter of this handle is slightly smaller than the top of my cap cake. I wrapped the string around, leaving a slight overlap. I'm carefully removing it and admiring the little circle I made. I'm snipping it in the place where the 2 pieces of trim overlap. I tried to attach it to the cake just like this, but the ends wanted to stay open. To make it fuss-free, I used some hot glue to close the end. Now I have a nice firm little circle I can just drop into a pile of glue on top of the cake. The third cake won't have any borders and will be entirely frosted. I sanded the tire cap to create a toothy surface for the spackle to stick to. I'm spreading the spackle to cover the entire surface and not worrying about how it looks at this stage. Once it's covered, I'm making rustic vertical lines in the cake sides. This is the type of pattern you can make in your frosting using a spoon. This next step adds some texture and seals all the components to keep them from coming off of the cap. To create the texture, I'm adding baking soda to some acrylic paint. When you add baking soda to paint, you do run the risk of having a strange reaction where these tiny crystal-like spores grow. It hasn't happened to me, but I saw it happen to Bentley House Minis on her gargoyle project. As an alternative, you could use fine sand or baby powder. I painted each of the cakes with 2 coats of paint and painted one of them brown so it looks like a chocolate cake. This color is a little darker than I intended, so I covered it with a second lighter coat. I'm decorating each cake a different way, starting with this mold from Temu that's meant for decorating your fingernails. I'm not really sure what people use to fill these with when they're decorating fingernails, but I'm filling my mold with some hot glue to start. I like using hot glue because it's non-toxic and it's very quick to dry. These roses have some delicate petals, so I'm bending the flexible mold to make sure I fill each of the petals with hot glue. I should have paid more attention because I missed some petals on the small roses, but the big one turned out great. I'm also doing a little experiment and seeing how some spackle roses turn out. I'm checking the other side of the clear mold to make sure it's completely filled. They turned out mostly good, but all of them were missing a petal or 2. Feel free to offer some tips. To capture more detail, I'm using some UV resin to cast another rose. I'm using a toothpick to get the UV resin into all of the petals. I'm curing the resin on the toothpick as well because resin is toxic until it's hardened. It turned out great, so I'm adding it on top of the frosted cake. I glued it on top of the wet spackle. You can't really see it on camera, but I painted the spackle a pale pink color once it had all dried. To bring out the details of the rose on top, I initially dry brushed it, but I thought it looked a little too plain, so I completely filled in the rose with red paint. I'm topping my chocolate cake with these small red no-hole beads. I have a nice little collection of beads I got in a lot on eBay. I like buying secondhand craft supplies because I get a nice variety at a price that's lower than retail. I'm hoping the beads look like candied cherries on a Black Forest cake. For the third and final cake, I'm making a fancy modern topper. I added the daub of hot glue and I'm dragging the end of a paintbrush through it to imitate the decoration you can make by dragging a spoon through chocolate. I painted the flat side with some red paint, flipped it over, and glazed the front using some Diamond Glaze to add shine. I'm gluing it on the painted nub on top so it looks like it's sitting in frosting. To protect the cakes and add a little bit of shine, I sealed them with matte Mod Podge. I not so carefully popped each of the cakes off their stick and none of them fell apart. This is a small portion of a lot of lace I bought on eBay. I chose some parts of the pattern to cut out to make doilies to go under my cakes. I do like the white, but it's a bit stark on camera in the thumbnail photo, so I'm staining my doilies with some tea. If I was doing this again, I would have used more water. I used just a few tablespoons of water in one bag of tea and my doilies came out pretty dark. I dabbed off the extra tea and rinsed them underwater and I think it helped lighten them up. This is my first attempt ever at making a cake I made with polymer clay. It didn't turn out how I wanted, so I covered it in caviar beads to try to save it. Working with beads, trim, and spackle was a lot easier for me than dealing with clay. I think it would be really cute to make more cakes out of different caps, as well as using the little square alphabet beads you find to make mini petit fours.